Crayfish. What do you think it would be like to have your skeleton on the outside of your body? You can study crayfish to find out. Crayfish are members of a group of animals called crustaceans. Crustaceans have their skeletons on the outside of their bodies. Crustaceans include lobsters, shrimps, crabs, and crayfish. Crayfish are aquatic organisms. They live in freshwater environments such as ponds, lakes, and streams. Crayfish have structures and behaviors that let them do many things. Crayfish move around in their environment, get food, protect themselves, and produce offspring. Let's take a look at the interesting structures first. Then we'll find out how those structures help crayfish survive in the environment. What are all of those parts on the crayfish? The main part of the body is the hard shell called the carapace. The head is at the front of the carapace and the jointed tail is at the back. The legs are attached under the carapace. There are 8 small walking legs and 2 big legs called pincers. You can also see 2 eyes and 2 long antennae at the front of the head. Look for the short antennae in the photographs of the crayfish on the next few pages. To tell male crayfish from female crayfish, you have to look at the underside. The small soft legs under the tail, called swimmerets, are important. If the first 2 swimmerets are long with white tips, the crayfish is a male. The male's other swimmerets are short. The female has long feather-like swimmerets. Also, the female has a white circle between the 4 back walking legs. This is the egg pore. When the female lays eggs, this is where they come out of. Look at the pictures of the male crayfish and female crayfish now. How do crayfish move? Crayfish spend most of their time at the bottom of a pond or other body of fresh water. To get around, they walk on their 8 walking legs. Those legs are jointed, so they can climb over rocks and logs easily. Crayfish can walk forward and backward. If a crayfish needs to move quickly, it can shoot through the water very fast. It uses its tail like a paddle. With a quick snap, the tail folds under its body, and the crayfish zooms away backward. This is what crayfish do to escape a predator, such as a large fish or raccoon. How do crayfish get food? Crayfish eat mostly dead plants and animals. They find their food with their antennae using a sense similar to smelling. Their pincers work well for tearing large food into smaller pieces. And have you ever noticed that the first 4 walking legs also have tiny pincers at their tips? These are good tools for picking up small bits of food. The crayfish has interesting mouth parts. They act like scissors and teeth for cutting and breaking food into pieces small enough to swallow. Crayfish can also use their pincers to catch other like organisms for food. The curved points at the tips of the pincers can catch and hold a fish that comes too close. How do crayfish protect themselves? Crayfish have a hard shell that is covered with points and bumps and bristles. The shell is a little like a suit of armor. This keeps crayfish safe from many predators. Crayfish also use their pincers for defense. When a crayfish is threatened, it raises its pincers as a warning. If the threat continues, the crayfish will use its pincers to attack. Because crayfish find food with their antennae, they prowl around mostly at night. During the day, crayfish find a piece to hide under a rock or a log. By being active at night and hiding during the day, crayfish are harder for predators to find. How do crayfish raise offspring? Crayfish start like an egg. After a male and female crayfish mate, the female lays eggs. However, she doesn't lay them in a nest or under a plant or rock. She carries them under her tail. The long, feather-like swimmerets hold the eggs and fan water around them. She can have 100 eggs or more under her tail. The eggs start to hatch in 4 to 6 weeks. The babies are only as long as a letter L on this page. They are hard to see because they are transparent. After they hatch, the babies stay under their mother's tail for protection. In a few days, they start to walk around on the gravel, but if they are startled, they scoot back under their mother's tail as quick as a flash. When the baby crayfish are about 2 weeks old, they leave the protection of their mother's tail. They are ready to start life on their own. When the offspring are 4 to 6 months old, they can mate and produce offspring. How do crayfish grow? Crayfish are completely covered by a hard shell. The shell cannot grow. So how does a crayfish that is less than 1 centimeter long get to be 10 centimeters long? The crayfish molts. During molting, the shell splits between the carapace and the tail. Then, with a couple of flips and shakes, the crayfish slides out of its old shell. The crayfish comes out with its new shell already on, but it is soft and flexible. This is when the crayfish grows. Within minutes, it expands, and the crayfish is much larger than it was before it molted. It is important for the freshly molted crayfish to stay hidden. It cannot defend itself or find food when its shell is soft. In 2 days, the shell will once again be hard and strong. A crayfish will molt 6 to 8 times during its life. It may molt 5 times in the first 2 months of life. This is when crayfish is growing the fastest. After its first year, it will molt less often because it is not growing as fast. Sometimes people introduce nanonative organisms to an area. Sorry guys, go back. Classroom crayfish. Crayfish are easy to keep in the classroom. All they need is clean, cool water, food to eat, and a place to hide. By observing closely, you can see how they use their antenna to sense their environment. You can see how they use their pincers to defend themselves and to get food. You might be able to see the several mouth parts working as they eat. And you might see them using the small pincers on their walking legs to clean their antenna. You can learn a lot about how their structures and behaviors help crayfish survive and grow in their aquatic environment. Being environmentally responsible. Crayfish are wonderful organisms to study in the classroom, but they can cause problems if they are released into local outdoor environments. The rule is that you never release classroom crayfish or any other organisms into natural areas. And if you collect native crayfish from local ponds, you should return them to exactly the same pond and not move them to another body of water. Why is this important? There are about 380 different species of kinds of crayfish in North America, more than any other continent. Each kind of crayfish lives in a particular freshwater environment. When an organism is found naturally in an area, it is native to that region. The classroom crayfish may not be native to your region. If an organism isn't naturally found in an area, it is nanonative to the area. Be responsible when studying crayfish. Sometimes people introduce non-native organisms to an area either intentionally or by accident. Non-native crayfish used as fishing bait, pets, or science projects should never be released. The introduced crayfish can cause problems by eating the native plants and competing with native animals for food and shelter. Introduced crayfish can eat native animals, including insects, snails, tadpoles, frogs, baby turtles, fish eggs, fish, and snakes. And if they're native crayfish, the native species may endanger the native species. Over time, the local crayfish might be entirely replaced by the introduced species. If an introduced organism thrives in a new area and causes problems, it is called invasive organism. Invasive organisms are changing ecosystems all over the United States. It is important to know how invasive species are introduced and how to prevent their spread. So remember to do your part to protect your local environment. never release classroom organisms into local areas.